My name is Helena Macedo. I'm 47 years old, Brazilian. And throughout my entire life I was a balanced, practical, organized woman. And even a bit skeptical regarding spiritual experiences. I grew up in a traditional Christian home, attending church on Sundays with my parents and participating in community events. But as adulthood arrived, my demanding work as a project manager, the crushing routine, financial problems, and endless responsibilities slowly suffocated my faith like fine sand slipping through fingers. I believed in God, yes, but in a distant, almost automatic way, like someone who believes the sun will rise tomorrow without really thinking about it. My religion had become a social habit, not a living experience. Until the day death came to me. And instead of taking me away, it took me to the highest place that exists. Everything happened on February 11th, 2024, a hot Sunday that began like any other ordinary weekend. I woke up at 6 in the morning, still with remnants of confused dreams in my mind, to prepare a special lunch because my parents were coming to visit. My mother always loved feijoada, a traditional Brazilian black bean stew, so I spent the entire morning cooking, seasoning, tasting, laughing at the stories my daughter Isabella told about college, and trying to keep my head occupied with practical tasks. For weeks I had been suffering from strong and recurring migraine attacks, plus a strange and persistent feeling of exhaustion that I insisted on ignoring, attributing it to work stress and advancing age. Lunch was pleasant, full of conversations about politics, soccer, and my parents' travel plans to the northern coast of Brazil. We laughed a lot, ate too much, and when they left around 3 in the afternoon, I felt that typical Sunday afternoon emptiness, that soft melancholy that comes after the house becomes silent again. That's when I decided to do something that had always relaxed me since adolescence. Drive to Camburi Beach, park the car near the boardwalk, and sit on the warm sand to observe the hypnotic movement of waves breaking on the shore. It was my secret refuge, my place of emotional healing. I felt I needed to breathe some salty air, organize my scattered thoughts, put my restless mind into silence. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that this would be the most remarkable, transformative, and overwhelming day of my entire existence. When I arrived at the beach around 4 o'clock, the wind was strong and refreshing, but pleasant. The sea was rough, with large waves forming white foam as they broke. There were few people on the sand, some surfers in the distance, a couple walking with a dog, children building castles near the water. I took off my shoes, felt the warm sand on my bare feet, walked to a more isolated spot and sat down, hugging my knees. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, trying to empty my mind. That's when I felt a tightness in my chest, so strong and so sudden that it made me choke violently. I tried to breathe deeply, but the air simply didn't seem to enter, as if my lungs had forgotten how to function. Within seconds, the tightness transformed into sharp pain, a stabbing pain that radiated through my left arm, climbed up my neck in pulsating waves, and burned intensely behind my sternum, as if something huge and heavy was being squeezed inside me with brutal force. That I tried to stand up, but my legs simply failed. The scenery in front of me became blurry, unfocused, as if someone had smeared petroleum jelly on my eyes. The deafening sound of the sea disappeared completely, replaced by a strange and distant buzzing. My hands began to tingle. My breathing became shallow, desperate. And then suddenly, without warning, I felt absolute silence. A deep, heavy, complete silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer sitting on the warm sand. I was above the beach, floating in the air like a leaf in the wind. I looked down with surprising visual clarity, and saw my own body lying on its side in the sand, motionless, with arms loose and face turned to the side. A young man in red shorts and shirtless was running toward me completely desperate, shouting something I couldn't hear. His hands were visibly trembling when he knelt beside me and grabbed his phone to urgently call for help. I observed all of this from above, floating about 5 meters high, with an indescribable and surreal calm, as if the unbearable pain had been switched off like a light switch and my body was just a distant memory, an old garment I had left behind. There was no panic, no paralyzing fear, no despair, only a strange and paradoxical sensation of absolute clarity, as if I had been ripped from earthly chaos and placed in a state of expanded full consciousness. But the true transcendental experience began shortly after. While I was observing my inert body on the sand and the young man trying to check my pulse, I felt a powerful presence behind me. It wasn't something visible at first, but it was unmistakable, strong, bright, intensely alive, pulsating. I turned slowly, or the spiritual equivalent of turning without having a physical body, and saw a monumental and luminous figure, almost 3 meters tall. The form was humanoid, but at the same time transcendent. It didn't have physical wings in the traditional sense that Renaissance paintings usually portray, but it possessed a form that resembled pure and condensed energy, vibrating at frequencies that my earthly eyes could never have perceived. It was a genuine angel that he didn't move his lips or open his mouth, but communicated to me directly, telepathically, with a voice that resonated inside my being. Helena, do not fear. We are here with you. Before I could mentally process anything or formulate a question, the entire environment began to change drastically. The beach, the rough sea, the blue sky. Everything gradually disappeared as if being swallowed by a golden and brilliant mist. My spiritual being was enveloped by an incandescent white light that pulsed rhythmically like a giant, living heart. I felt my spiritual body being pulled upward with increasing speed, faster and faster, constantly accelerating, until the brightness became so intense and overwhelming that I needed to close my spiritual eyes, even though I no longer had eyes in the physical and material sense. When I could see again, when the light allowed me to perceive, I realized with absolute astonishment that I was in a place that no word in human language is remotely capable of describing fairly or adequately that I was in. True heaven. And heaven is alive. Completely, intensely, magnificently alive. Everything there seemed to sing in perfect harmony. Colors had their own sounds. Lights possessed physical texture. The air had tangible love. There was no weight, no oppressive gravity, no fatigue, no residual pain. The sensation was that everything, absolutely everything, was in complete and absolute harmony, as if every molecule, every particle, every atom vibrated in the same cosmic and eternal melody. But what impacted me most profoundly were the celestial beings that surrounded me on all sides. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. Possibly millions. Magnificent angels in different forms and manifestations. Some were like pure and undifferentiated light, so intensely bright that I could only feel their overwhelming presence without being able to define contours. Others had more defined and recognizable appearances, like resplendent human figures dressed in garments that seemed made of liquid light, with deep eyes that seemed to contain entire universes spinning inside them. And all, absolutely all without exception, transmitted a peace so deep, so complete, so perfect that it made me cry spiritual tears of pure gratitude. That's when I heard a different voice from the others, a voice that wasn't like earthly voices or even like angelic communications. It was as if each pronounced syllable had infinite layers of meaning. A voice that simultaneously carried absolute authority, unlimited power, maternal tenderness, unconditional love, and complete eternity, all at the same time, without contradiction. Helena.my name sounded like celestial music. When I raised my spiritual gaze forward, he stood before me. Jesus Christ in person. Not like in the simplified illustrations of catechism books, not like in idealized European paintings, but in a form simultaneously human and indescribable. His face was recognizable as human, yet radiated pure divinity. His presence was so powerfully loving that everything inside me, every fragment of my soul, knelt reverently, prostrated in worship, even before I consciously thought to approach or show respect. His eyes contained infinite depth, eternities of wisdom, and when he smiled gently at me, all reality around seemed to illuminate even more intensely. As if his joy were the source of all existing light, he extended his pierced hand toward where I stood. Visible marks of crucifixion still present. And when he touched my spiritual hand, or whatever represented my hand in that immaterial state, I felt a tsunami wave of love so intense, so overwhelming, so complete that I completely lost any capacity for logical reasoning. I could only feel, just feel pure love. You arrived before your appointed time, my beloved daughter, he said with infinite tenderness. The phrase pierced through me like liquid light coursing through every fiber of my being. Did I really die? I asked mentally, but without emitting physical voice or audible sound. Your body stopped temporarily. Your physical heart rested for a moment. But your earthly story hasn't ended yet. There is much more written for you. I began to cry copiously. There was no sadness in those spiritual tears, only a deep and overwhelming recognition of being before the one who created me from nothing, the one who knew me infinitely better than I had ever known or would ever know myself. Come with me. I want to show you something important, Jesus said with a melodious voice. Jesus made a gentle and elegant gesture with his right hand, and a kind of luminous path opened before us, as if the very celestial light floor moved and reorganized itself to create a road. We walked side by side. I didn't feel concrete steps, just glided smoothly, until we arrived before a monumental and imposing portal. It was alive, breathed rhythmic light, and seemed constructed of something similar to earthly gold, but infinitely purer, more intense, more immaculate and perfect. When the gigantic portal opened majestically, emitting a sound like soft thunder mixed with choral music, I saw a place that made all my emotions enter into total and absolute collapse. The throne room of God was absolutely immense, infinite in all directions. A living and pulsating temple, where the indescribable glory of God radiated as the gravitational center of the entire universe. The divine throne was like a living mountain of incandescent light, completely impossible to adequately describe with the limited vocabulary of human words. Around the throne, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, of angels sang in perpetual worship, but it wasn't a common or earthly song. It was much more complex. Multidimensional vibrations, infinite layers of harmonic sounds, colors in synchronized movement, perfect and mathematical harmony. And in the absolute center of everything, elevated above all creation, was God the Father in his indescribable and transcendent form. There was no humanly defined face that could be described, but there was presence. A presence so monumentally powerful, so infinitely holy, so absolutely perfect that, if I still possessed a physical body made of flesh and bone, it would have disintegrated instantly just from the proximity. The divine glory was so intensely strong that my entire spiritual being automatically prostrated itself in complete worship. Even without him needing to say any word or issue any command, that I heard the eternal sound of eternity itself, that I felt the crushing weight of absolute infinity, that I viscerally perceived how his love was infinitely greater, deeper, vaster than any microscopic seed of pain, suffering, or evil that has ever existed or will exist on fallen earth. Jesus placed his gentle hand on my spiritual shoulder and said with a comforting voice, "Everything here exists exclusively by him, for him, and through him. All creation, every universe, and you, Helena, are an eternal and beloved part of all this." I remained prostrate there, worshipping what seemed simultaneously like a complete eternity, and at the same time an infinitesimal millisecond. In true heaven, time simply doesn't function in a linear way as we know it here on Earth. Past, present, and future coexist. I felt everything, saw everything, understood mysteries, was completely filled by everything that exists. But then Jesus spoke again with loving seriousness. "Helena, you need to go back now. There is something specific that only you can accomplish. There are people waiting for you on Earth, even though they don't consciously know it yet. Your earthly life still has many important chapters eternally written in my divine heart." That I cried desperately. I don't want to leave here. Not after seeing all this. Not after feeling this love. "I know perfectly what you feel," Jesus responded with infinite empathy. "But I will be with you constantly. Every remaining day. Every moment. Until the end of your earthly days." The celestial light gradually began to withdraw. The magnificent throne room slowly distanced itself. The worshipping angels disappeared from view. Jesus gave one last radiant smile. A smile that carried the entire universe, all hope, all love within it. And then everything abruptly darkened. I felt a violent impact. A sharp pain exploding in my chest. A brutal pull of air being forced into my collapsed lungs. And I heard human voices shouting desperately, "She's back. Pulse is back. Continue the compressions. Don't stop." I opened my earthly eyes with difficulty. The beach was above me now, the orange sky of late afternoon. SAMU paramedics and firefighters completely surrounded me. My chest burned like living fire. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. But I was alive again. And I knew with absolute certainty I would never be the same Helena as before. The days that followed my return were a confusing mixture of physical pain and spiritual awakening. The doctors at the hospital explained that I had suffered a severe cardiac arrest caused by an undiagnosed coronary artery blockage. I had been clinically dead for approximately 4 minutes before the young man on the beach, whose name I later learned was Raphael, a medical student, began CPR and kept me alive until the paramedics arrived. 4 minutes. That's all it took for my entire worldview to be shattered and rebuilt. The medical team was amazed by my recovery. They said that after 4 minutes without oxygen, most people who survive suffer irreversible brain damage. But I had none. No cognitive impairment, no memory loss, nothing. In fact, I felt more mentally clear and sharp than I had in years. What they couldn't measure or understand was what had changed inside my soul that I tried to tell the doctors about my experience, about heaven, about Jesus, about the throne room of God. Most smiled politely and attributed it to hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation in the brain. One cardiologist even explained the neurological theories about near-death experiences, how the dying brain releases chemicals that create vivid visions. But I knew better. What I experienced was far too real, too detailed, too transformative to be mere brain chemistry. The love I felt, the presence I encountered, the absolute certainty I gained. No scientific explanation could diminish or explain away what happened to me in those minutes outside my body. My daughter Isabella believed me immediately. When I told her about meeting Jesus, about seeing the angels, about standing before God's throne, her eyes filled with tears. She held my hand and said, "Mom, I always knew there was more to life than what we can see. Thank you for coming back to tell us about it." My parents were more cautious but deeply moved. My father, who had always been the more religious one, asked me detailed questions about what heaven looked like, what Jesus said, how it felt to be in God's presence. My mother simply cried and thanked God for giving me back to them. But the hardest person to convince was myself, not about the reality of what happened, but about what it meant for how I should live the rest of my life. Jesus had told me that my earthly story wasn't finished, that there were specific things only I could accomplish, that people were waiting for me even though they didn't know it yet. But what did that mean? What was I supposed to do? In the weeks following my cardiac arrest, I underwent surgery to place stents in my blocked arteries. The physical recovery was challenging, but the spiritual transformation was even more intense. I found myself unable to care about the trivial things that had once consumed my attention. Work deadlines, social media drama, celebrity gossip. It all seemed so meaningless after standing in the presence of eternity, that I started reading the Bible with new eyes, understanding passages that had previously seemed abstract or irrelevant. I began attending church regularly again, but this time not out of habit or social obligation, but out of a desperate hunger to stay connected to what I had experienced in those 4 minutes outside of time. And slowly, gradually, I began to understand what Jesus meant when he said there were things only I could do. I started sharing my story, first with close friends, then with my church community, and eventually with anyone who would listen. I discovered that my experience gave hope to people who were struggling with grief, doubt, fear of death, and loss of faith. My testimony wasn't about converting anyone or proving anything scientifically. It was simply about sharing what I had seen, what I had felt, and what I now knew with unshakable certainty. That heaven is real, that God's love is infinite, that death is not the end, and that every single one of us is eternally loved beyond measure. That I also learned that the young man who saved my life, Raphael, had been struggling with his own crisis of faith. He had been on that beach that afternoon contemplating dropping out of medical school because he felt he wasn't making a difference in the world. Finding me, performing CPR, and saving my life had renewed his sense of purpose. When we met weeks later, we both cried as we realized that God had orchestrated that moment not just to save my life, but to save his calling as well. That's when I fully understood. My near-death experience wasn't just about me. It was about everyone whose life would be touched by my story, everyone who would hear about heaven's reality and find hope, everyone who would be reminded that we are all part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than we can imagine. That I will never be the same Helena I was before February 11th, 2024. The practical, skeptical, spiritually distant woman who sat down on that beach is gone. In her place is someone who has seen beyond the veil, someone who knows with absolute certainty that our earthly struggles are temporary, that love is eternal, and that the best is yet to come. And every single day, I remember Jesus' last words to me. I will be with you constantly, every remaining day, every moment, until the end of your earthly days. It's a promise I cling to, a truth I live by, and a hope I share with everyone I meet. Because if my story can bring even one person closer to understanding the infinite love that awaits us all, then every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of my second chance at life will have been worth it.